A farmer was walking his own land in New South Wales when he picked up a strange red rock, and that single rock would go on to rewrite what scientists thought they knew about how life on Earth gets preserved forever. Buried beneath dry, dusty Australian farmland, hidden from every satellite and every textbook, lay a secret so well kept that a team of scientists spent years quietly digging it up before the world ever heard its name. What they found inside was not just old bones or broken shells. It was an entire lost world, frozen in a kind of rock nobody believed could freeze anything at all. The site is called McGraths Flat, named after Nigel McGrath, the farmer who first noticed those unusual red stones scattered across his property near the small town of Gulgong in the central tablelands of New South Wales. Gulgong itself carries a name from the Wiradjuri language meaning deep waterhole, and that name turned out to be more fitting than anyone could have guessed. Because millions of years before any farm, any fence, or any human foot ever touched that soil, this exact spot was a quiet, slow-moving body of water, most likely a billabong, sitting in the middle of a lush, dense rainforest. Today, that same land looks nothing like a rainforest. It is dry, cracked, sunburnt, and quiet in the way only the Australian outback can be. But between 11 million and 16 million years ago, during a period called the Miocene Epoch, this region was thriving. It was warm, wet, and absolutely full of life, packed with plants, insects, spiders, fish, and birds, living out entire generations in a forest that no longer exists anywhere on the planet. And then, slowly, one layer at a time, that entire world sank into the mud and vanished from history, or so everyone assumed. Here is where the story takes its strangest turn. When paleontologists finally cracked open the reddish rock scattered across McGrath's farmland, they realized it was not sandstone, shale, or limestone, the usual suspects when it comes to fossils. It was goethite, a fine-grained iron-rich mineral, essentially the geological equivalent of rust. For as long as modern paleontology has existed, iron-rich rock like this was considered a dead end. Scientists believed rust simply could not preserve the delicate, soft tissue of ancient organisms the way fine sediment could. McGrath's Flat proved almost everyone wrong. Inside this so-called impossible rock, researchers found some of the most detailed fossils ever recovered anywhere on Earth, rivaling world-famous sites like Germany's Messel Pit and Canada's Burgess Shale, locations that have defined the gold standard of fossil preservation for decades. Except this time, the preservation was not happening in fine ancient mud or volcanic ash. It was happening inside rust, a material every geology textbook had quietly written off as fossil poison rather than fossil protection. The mechanism turned out to be almost poetic in its simplicity. Tiny particles of iron, so small that roughly 100 of them could fit across the width of a single human hair, slowly infiltrated the remains of dead organisms at the bottom of that ancient billabong. Instead of destroying the soft tissue the way normal decay would, those microscopic iron particles filled every cell almost instantly, essentially entombing the organism at a cellular level before bacteria or oxygen ever had the chance to break it down. The result is a rock called ferricrete, a natural cement bound together by iron oxyhydroxide instead of the silica or carbonate found in ordinary fossil beds. What researchers pulled out of that iron tomb defies belief. Spiders were found fossilized down to the individual hairs on their legs, a level of anatomical detail almost never seen in fossils of soft-bodied creatures this old. Before McGrath's Flat was discovered, only 4 fossil spiders had ever been found across the entire continent of Australia in all of recorded paleontological history. At this single site alone, researchers have since uncovered 13 spiders, many of them essentially complete, with microscopic anatomical structures still perfectly visible under a microscope. And the spiders are just the beginning. Scientists have also recovered dragonfly nymphs, giant cicadas, assassin bugs, parasitoid wasps, and other insect groups in such fine detail that almost every single one of them represents a species completely new to science, most of which have not even been formally named yet. One fossilized katydid recovered from a related iron-rich deposit was so well preserved that scientists could actually see its muscles, its digestive tract, its glands, and even a testicle, an almost unbelievable level of anatomical survival for an insect that has been dead for tens of millions of years. Then there are the fish. Using scanning electron microscopy, researchers were able to zoom into individual fish specimens and find something remarkable inside their eyes and skin, tiny structures called melanosomes, subcellular organelles responsible for storing the pigment melanin. These structures are so precisely preserved that scientists could compare their shape and arrangement to melanosomes found in living fish today, and from that comparison actually reconstruct the original color pattern of a fish species that has been extinct for around 15 million years. That fish was eventually named Ferroaspis broxi, honoring the researcher who first discovered several specimens at the site. What makes this fish so scientifically significant is not just its age or its preservation, but the fact that this marks the very first time melanosomes have ever been used to reconstruct the coloration of an extinct fish species anywhere in the world. Before this discovery, that kind of pigment-based color reconstruction had only ever been achieved using fossil feathers, never with fish. To understand just how big of a leap this is, it helps to remember that color almost never survives the fossilization process. Pigments are chemically fragile, and in the vast majority of fossils, they break down and vanish long before anyone ever digs the specimen out of the ground. Scientists usually have to guess at coloration using indirect clues, comparisons to living relatives, or educated assumptions based on habitat and behavior. At McGraths Flat, for the first time in a fish, researchers did not have to guess. They had actual physical evidence, locked inside melanosomes that had survived essentially unchanged for 15 million years. This breakthrough technique is not just a neat trick. It is a genuine shift in how paleontologists approach ancient color reconstruction across the entire fossil record. If melanosomes can survive this clearly in fish tissue preserved inside iron-rich rock, then other iron-rich fossil beds around the world, sites that were never studied closely because nobody expected soft tissue survival, may be holding on to similar pigment evidence, just waiting for someone to look with the right tools and the right expectations. And speaking of feathers, McGraths Flat has produced exactly one fossilized bird feather, and it might be one of the most scientifically valuable feathers ever found. Under extreme magnification, researchers identified sacs of melanin inside the feather's structure, and the shape of those melanin sacs suggests the feather may have belonged to a bird with dark or even iridescent coloring, a shimmering, color-shifting sheen similar to what you see on certain modern birds today. A single feather, sealed inside rust for over 11 million years, quietly holding on to evidence of what color it once was. The fossils do not just show researchers what these ancient creatures looked like. They show what these creatures were doing in the final moments of their lives. Several fish specimens were recovered with their stomachs still full of undigested midges, meaning scientists can literally reconstruct what these animals ate for their last meal millions of years before humans ever existed. One fossilized sawfly was discovered with its head completely covered in pollen, frozen mid-feeding, likely captured just moments after visiting a flower for nectar. These are not just fossils. They are ancient snapshots of ordinary days that ended in an instant and then sat undisturbed for over 10 million years. Even the plant life at McGraths Flat has been preserved with a level of detail that borders on unsettling. Fossilized leaves recovered. From the site still show their pores, the microscopic openings plants use to breathe in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Researchers can look at leaves from a rainforest that vanished millions of years ago and study the exact structures those plants used to survive, as if the forest had been paused rather than destroyed. That kind of preservation matters more than it might first appear. Leaf pores can reveal how plants were adapting to the carbon dioxide, levels and humidity of their environment at the time, essentially acting as tiny biological instruments recording the atmospheric conditions of a world that no longer exists. By studying these ancient leaves side by side with modern plant relatives, scientists can begin piecing together not just what the rainforest looked like, but what its air, its climate, and its daily rhythms may have actually felt like millions of years before anyone was around to experience it. Researchers have also used electron microscopy to examine individual body cells across many of these specimens, and in some cases, they have identified structures as small as individual nerve cells, still recognizable after millions of years buried in rust. That level of cellular survival is almost unheard of anywhere else in the fossil record, and it is part of the reason paleontologists keep describing this site using words like impossible, extraordinary, and unprecedented, even among scientists who are famously reluctant to use dramatic language in their own research. Putting all of these pieces together, researchers have been able to reconstruct an entire lost ecosystem, not just a handful of isolated creatures. The picture that emerges is of a quiet, oxygen-poor lake, likely cut off from a larger meandering river the same way an oxbow lake forms today, sitting calm and mostly predator-free for long stretches of time. Every so often, though, that nearby river would flood, washing fish, insects, and other creatures into the lake where they would sink, become trapped in iron-rich sediment, and eventually be locked away for millions of years, waiting for a farmer in the 21st century to stumble across the right rock at the right moment. This lost rainforest existed during a critical and dramatic period of Earth's history. The Miocene Epoch was a time of enormous transformation for the Australian continent, which had already broken away from Antarctica and South America and was steadily drifting northward toward its current position. In the early Miocene, Australia was rich with diverse plant and animal life, flourishing in warm, wet conditions across huge stretches of the continent. But then, roughly 14 million years ago, An abrupt shift in global climate known as the Middle Miocene disruption struck, triggering widespread extinctions and permanently transforming ecosystems across the continent, eventually helping to turn lush green landscapes like this one into the dry, arid outback we recognize today. That transformation is exactly why McGraths Flat matters so much. It captures a version of Australia that essentially no longer exists anywhere on Earth. A living rainforest ecosystem sitting right in the middle of what is now one of the driest, most unforgiving landscapes on the planet. Without this single site, an entire chapter of Australia's ecological history, one filled with unique spiders, insects, fish, and plants, may have simply been lost, buried under millions of years of climate change, with no fossil record left behind to prove it ever existed. It is worth pausing on just how dramatic that shift really was. The same land that once supported towering rainforest canopies, slow-moving rivers, and an enormous diversity of insects and fish eventually transformed into some of the driest, most extreme terrain found anywhere on the continent. Very few places on Earth offer such a stark, almost jarring contrast between what a landscape used to be and what it eventually became, and even fewer of those places left behind physical proof detailed enough to actually prove it. Scientists classify McGraths Flat as a Lagerstätte, a German geological term reserved for only the rarest fossil sites on the planet, places where preservation quality is so exceptional that soft tissue, delicate structures, and even microscopic cellular details survive intact. Very few locations in the world qualify for that title, and almost none of them involve iron-rich rock. That is precisely why this discovery has sent ripples through the global paleontology community, because it does not just add one more fossil site to the list. It fundamentally challenges the rules scientists have used for over a century to predict where fossils can and cannot form. Terrestrial fossil sites capable of preserving soft tissue are already incredibly rare across the entire fossil record. Most well-preserved fossils come from marine environments because calm, oxygen-poor seafloors are extremely good at quickly burying and protecting dead organisms before decay sets in. On land, the situation is far more brutal. Scavengers move in almost immediately. Bacteria break down soft tissue within days, and weather erodes whatever is left before burial can ever properly begin. That is exactly why land-based soft tissue fossils, especially delicate ones like spiders, feathers, and insect organs, have always been considered extraordinarily rare finds. This imbalance has quietly shaped almost everything scientists think they know about the history of life on land. Because terrestrial soft tissue fossils are so rare, huge portions of Earth's evolutionary story involving insects, spiders, and small land animals remain poorly understood compared to their marine counterparts. Entire branches of the ancient food web, the pollinators, the predators, the tiny creatures that quietly held ecosystems together, often leave almost no trace at all. McGraths Flat is a rare exception to that pattern, and that is exactly why researchers describe it as filling in a gap that most scientists assumed could never be filled. Every new spider, wasp, or cicada pulled from that iron-rich ground and formally named adds another small piece to a puzzle that paleontologists have been trying to complete for well over a century. Some of these species may turn out to be direct ancestors of creatures still living in Australia today, while others may represent entire evolutionary branches that quietly disappeared and left no other trace anywhere in the fossil record. Without McGraths Flat, science might never have known these creatures existed at all. McGraths Flat has now added an entirely new category of rock to the very short list of materials proven capable of stopping that destructive process in its tracks. And the implications of that discovery reach far beyond this one farm in New South Wales. Geologists in Australia and around the world are now actively re-examining ferricrete outcrops in other iron-rich, basalt-heavy regions that share a similar climate history to Miocene Australia, places that were previously ignored entirely because nobody thought exceptional fossils could ever form inside rust. In other words, this discovery is not just rewriting the history books. It may be rewriting the search itself, redirecting where paleontologists around the world choose to dig next. If a farmer's rock pile in rural Australia was hiding one of the most detailed fossil records on the planet, then similar rust-colored outcrops sitting quietly in other countries, completely unexamined for the exact same reason, might be hiding their own lost worlds as well, each one waiting for someone to finally take a second look. If discoveries like this fascinate you, make sure you hit that subscribe button because stories like McGraths Flat prove that some of the biggest secrets about life on Earth are not hiding in some remote, unreachable corner of the planet. They are sometimes sitting quietly under a farmer's boots, disguised as nothing more than ordinary red rock. What makes this story even more remarkable is the sheer scale of what researchers still have left to study. Thousands of individual specimens have already been recovered from McGraths Flat, and the overwhelming majority of them still have not been formally identified or named. Every single new specimen pulled from that iron-rich ground has the potential to represent a species that has never been documented in the entire history of science. An entirely new branch on the tree of life, sitting quietly in a drawer waiting for someone to finally examine it closely enough. Researchers from the Australian Museum Research Institute have already spent years secretly excavating the site before ever going public with their findings, carefully documenting each layer before word could spread and before the location could potentially be disturbed. That level of secrecy alone tells you just how significant scientists believe this discovery to be from the very beginning, long before the wider world ever learned the name McGraths Flat. There's also something quietly humbling about how this discovery unfolded in the first place. For generations, paleontologists searching for exceptional fossil sites focused almost entirely on the same handful of rock types, the same familiar shales, the same volcanic ash deposits, the same limestone formations that had already proven themselves reliable time and time again. Iron-rich rock, ordinary-looking rust-colored stone, was essentially invisible to that search, dismissed before anyone ever thought to crack one open. McGraths Flat exists today only because someone finally chose to look somewhere nobody expected to find anything at all. That single decision has already begun changing fieldwork practices well beyond Australia. Paleontologists studying similar climate zones in other parts of the world are now reconsidering iron-rich outcrops they had previously ignored, aware that an entirely new category of preservation has just been proven possible. It is a reminder that some of science's biggest breakthroughs do not come from better equipment or bigger budgets, but from a willingness to question an assumption that everyone else had simply accepted as settled fact. And this raises an unsettling but genuinely thrilling question for anyone who loves science. If an entire rainforest ecosystem, complete with fossilized spider hairs, fish stomach contents, and feather pigment cells, could remain completely hidden beneath ordinary Australian farmland for millions of years without a single person noticing, what else might be sitting beneath our feet right now, quietly disguised as nothing more than an unremarkable red rock? Somewhere out there, in a field, on a hillside, or beneath someone's backyard, another lost world may be waiting for exactly the right person to pick up exactly the right stone, because that is precisely what happened here. A farmer, walking his own land, noticed something slightly unusual about a rock most people would have kicked aside without a second thought. That small moment of curiosity eventually led scientists to one of the most important fossil discoveries in Australia's history: a hidden rainforest, an extinct fish with a reconstructed color pattern, a feather that once shimmered, spiders preserved down to their leg hairs, and an entirely new material added to the very short list of substances capable of preserving life across millions of years. The rules of fossil preservation, rules that had stood largely unchallenged for well over a century, were rewritten by a patch of rust-colored rock sitting beneath an ordinary Australian farm. And if this discovery has taught scientists anything, it is that the story of life on Earth is nowhere near finished being told. There are still entire lost worlds out there, sealed away in places. Nobody thought to look, waiting patiently for the next unexpected rock, the next unusual find, and the next scientist willing to ask why something looks just a little bit different than it should. Scientists studying McGraths Flat openly admit they are still only scratching the surface of what this single site has to offer. New specimens continue to emerge from the ground every field season, and each one carries the potential to challenge existing assumptions all over again, the same way the very first red rock did back when a farmer bent down to take a closer look. In a field of science built on patience and careful observation, McGraths Flat has become a rare reminder of just how much is still left to discover. So if this kind of hidden history excites you the way it excites so many researchers right now, do not forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories like this one, because the ground beneath our feet clearly still has secrets left to give.